This is the VOA Special English Health Report. Increasing evidence suggests that being active can reduce a person's risk of dementia. Dementia is the name for the effects of Alzheimer's disease, stroke, and other brain disorders. People may be considered to have dementia if they lose abilities in two or more areas, such as memory and language skills. Other signs of dementia include a loss of ability to think clearly or control emotions. The World Health Organization says about 35 million people worldwide are living with dementia. Most studies of exercise and dementia depend on self-reporting, asking people to report their levels of physical activity. Laura Middleton is a researcher at the Sunnybrook Research Institute and the University of Waterloo in Canada. She says there are problems with self-reporting. It does a very good job of capturing jogging or biking or tennis, but does a relatively poor job of capturing low-intensity activity like walking or daily chores, which may also be important to the risk of cognitive impairment. So Professor Middleton led a team in a new study to measure activity levels scientifically. The study lasted 5 years. Almost 200 people took part. Their average age was 75. The people drank small amounts of what scientists call doubly labeled water. It contains forms of hydrogen and oxygen that can mark or label these elements within body water. This way, scientists can measure energy use through urine tests. The research showed that the greater the level of activity, the greater the reduction in the risk of memory loss and other cognitive impairment. The study is published in the Archives of Internal Medicine. In a second study, French researchers reported on exercise and dementia in women with heart risks like obesity or diabetes. Marie-Noëlle Vercambre of the Foundation for Public Health in Paris led the study. The findings suggest that even a half-hour walk at a quick speed every day could lower the risk of cognitive impairment. Dr. Eric Larson of the Group Health Research Institute in Seattle, Washington, wrote a commentary about the studies. It's not obvious to people that exercise would make your brain healthier, he says, but the latest findings add to the evidence that it does. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. For more health news and to learn English, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Traditional fisheries may no longer be the world's most important provider of fish. A new United Nations report shows that fish farming or aquaculture may soon lead fish production. The Food and Agriculture Organization says aquaculture is growing by a rate of 6.6% a year. Aquaculture now produces 46% of the world's supply of fish. That represents a 43% increase from 2006. The report also said aquaculture earned more money in 2008 than traditional fisheries. The FAO headquarters in Rome published the document, State of the World's Fisheries and Aquaculture. In aquaculture, fish are raised in tanks or small bodies of water called ponds. They also are raised in cages or nets in oceans, lakes, and rivers. The report says increased aquaculture has helped people around the world eat record amounts of fish. The FAO says each person ate an average of almost 17 kilograms of fish last year. But the FAO says the current yearly wild fish harvest of 90 million tons shows no improvement. Decreasing numbers of fish and stronger catch limits have reduced the possibilities for catching wild fish. The FAO report says about 32% of world supplies are overfished, depleted, or recovering. It said these supplies of fish need to be urgently rebuilt. Some scientists have criticized aquaculture. They say the nets and cages permit fish diseases and pests to spread. Some aquaculture critics doubt that aquaculture can keep growing at the current rate. But Wally Stevens of the trade group Global Aquaculture Alliance says the industry must continue developing to feed growing populations. Mr. Stevens says a 100% increase in fish farming over 10 years is necessary to keep providing for people at the current level. He notes that aquaculture creates jobs and wealth, especially for people in coastal areas of China. The FAO reports that China remains the world's largest fish-producing nation. China produces more than 60% of the world's farmed fish. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. Our programs are online with transcripts and MP3 files at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at VOA Learning English.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. President Obama is proposing rules to limit the size of big banks and the risks they can take. He wants to prevent banks from using government-insured deposits to make risky investments. He also wants to keep them from owning hedge funds or private equity funds. Banks took big losses as they traded mortgage-backed securities that went bad. That helped create the financial crisis. Bank shares fell after the president's announcement in January. His earlier efforts at financial reform have faced strong opposition from financial companies and some members of Congress. In the Senate, 60 votes are needed to prevent unlimited debate on a bill. But the Democrats lost their 60th vote. In January, voters in Massachusetts elected a Republican to finish the term of Ted Kennedy, who died in August. Scott Brown opposes the health care legislation in Congress. His election could also affect other areas, like climate change legislation and reforms in the financial system. A separate development in January could affect future elections. The United States Supreme Court cleared the way for unlimited spending by businesses and labor unions in political campaigns. The court voted 5-4 to end a ban on the use of corporate money to pay for independent campaign ads for or against candidates. The court said the restriction on political speech violated the free speech rights guaranteed by the Constitution. But President Obama said the decision will reduce the influence of average Americans. He called it a major victory for powerful interests like big oil companies, Wall Street banks, and health insurance companies. He directed his administration to talk with congressional leaders from both parties to develop a forceful response. Elections for Congress are this November. The next presidential election is in 2012. January 20th marked Barack Obama's first anniversary in office, but the Republican victory in liberal Massachusetts was seen in large part as a sign of voter anger across the country about the economy. Unemployment has doubled in 2 years to 10%. Many people are angry that they struggle while the government rescued big banks. Some banks took losses last year, but others earned record profits. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Some schools in the United States and other countries offer Chinese language classes with government support from China. St. Mary's School is a private college preparatory school in Medford, Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest. Carly Irvine is in her 4th year of learning Mandarin. She says, "Since China and America are working so closely and our relationship is growing more and more, I think it will be very important in the future to know Chinese." St. Mary's also teaches Spanish, German, and Latin. It added Mandarin in 2005. 2 years ago, it became the first school in the country to join the Confucius Classroom program. The program pays about half the costs of a teacher sent to the school in the United States. China's education ministry also provides books and other materials. St. Mary's principal, Frank Phillips, says knowing Chinese will help students in a world where China is quickly gaining economic power. But he admits to concerns in his local community. He says, "The question I always get is this a gigantic propaganda move? Is this an evil communist plot on the part of China? From what I can detect, having been involved in it for 2 years, I see none of that." In fact, the program has won the support of his local representative in the state legislature. Dennis Richardson says he has concerns about human rights in China, but he is among several lawmakers who have been pushing for more Chinese language education in public schools in Oregon. Young Ling, a teacher at St. Mary's, came from China in 2008. She says, "People do not know much about China, especially the latest development. So I think this is a chance for them to know more about China, what China is really like. It's quite different from what it was 20 years ago. The Confucius Classroom program is in about 40 countries, including more than 50 American schools and universities. A recent report said more schools in the United States are teaching Chinese and Arabic, although the numbers are still low. But it said foreign language teaching in public elementary and middle schools dropped sharply in recent years. Some schools say a federal law that only measures progress in math and reading has hurt language teaching. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report.
Our story today is called Luck. It was written by Mark Twain. Here is Shep O'Neill with the story.
I was at a dinner in London, given in honor of one of the most celebrated English military men of his time. I do not want to tell you his real name and titles. I will just call him Lieutenant General Lord Arthur Scoresby. I cannot describe my excitement when I saw this great and famous man. There he sat, the man himself, in person, all covered with medals. I could not take my eyes off him. He seemed to show the true mark of greatness. His fame had no effect on him. The hundreds of eyes watching him, the worship of so many people, did not seem to make any difference to him. Next to me sat a clergyman, who was an old friend of mine. He was not always a clergyman. During the first half of his life, he was a teacher in the military school at Woolwich. There was a strange look in his eye as he leaned toward me and whispered, "Privately, he is a complete fool." He meant, of course, the hero of our dinner. This came as a shock to me. I looked hard at my friend. I could not have been more surprised if he had said the same thing about Napoleon, or Socrates, or Solomon. But I was sure of two things about the clergyman. He always spoke the truth, and his judgment of men was good. Therefore, I wanted to find out more about our hero as soon as I could. Some days later, I got a chance to talk with the clergyman, and he told me more. These are his exact words. About 40 years ago, I was an instructor in the military academy at Woolwich when young Scoresby was given his first examination. I felt extremely sorry for him. Everybody answered the questions, well, intelligently, while he, why, dear me, he did not know anything, so to speak. He was a nice, pleasant young man. It was painful to see him stand there and give answers that were miracles of stupidity. I knew, of course, that when examined again, he would fail and be thrown out. So, I said to myself, it would be a simple, harmless act to help him as much as I could. I took him aside and found he knew a little about Julius Caesar's history, but he did not know anything else. So I went to work and tested him and worked him like a slave. I made him work over and over again on a few questions about Caesar, which I knew he would be asked. If you will believe me, He came through very well on the day of the examination. He got high praise, too, while others, who knew 1,000 times more than he, were sharply criticized. By some strange, lucky accident, he was asked no questions but those I made him study. Such an accident does not happen more than once in 100 years. Well, all through his studies, I stood by him with the feeling a mother has for a disabled child. And he always saved himself by some miracle. I thought that what in the end would destroy him would be the mathematics examination. I decided to make his end as painless as possible. So I pushed facts into his stupid head for hours. Finally, I let him go to the examination to experience what I was sure would be his dismissal from school. Well, sir, try to imagine the result. I was shocked out of my mind. He took first prize, and he got the highest praise. I felt guilty day and night. What I was doing was not right, but I only wanted to make his dismissal a little less painful for him. I never dreamed it would lead to such strange, laughable results. I thought that sooner or later one thing was sure to happen. The first real test, once he was through school, would ruin him. Then the Crimean War broke out. I felt that sad for him that there had to be a war. Peace would have given this donkey a chance to escape from ever being found out as being so stupid. Nervously, I waited for the worst to happen. It did. He was appointed an officer, a captain of all things. Who could have dreamed that they would place such a responsibility on such weak shoulders as his? I said to myself that I was responsible to the country for this. I must go with him and protect the nation against him as far as I could. So I joined up with him, and away we went to the field. And there, oh dear, it was terrible. Mistakes, fearful mistakes. Why, he never did anything that was right. Nothing but mistakes. But you see, nobody knew the secret of how stupid he really was. Everybody misunderstood his actions. They saw his stupid mistakes as works of great intelligence. They did, honestly. His smallest mistakes made a man in his right mind cry and shout and scream, too, to himself, of course. And what kept me in a continual fear was the fact that every mistake he made increased his glory and fame. I kept saying to myself that when at last they find out about him, it will be like the sun falling out of the sky. He continued to climb up, over the dead bodies of his superiors. Then, in the hottest moment of one battle, down went our colonel. My heart jumped into my mouth, for Scoresby was the next in line to take his place. Now we are in for it, I said. The battle grew hotter. The English and their allies were steadily retreating all over the field. Our regiment occupied a position that was extremely important. One mistake now would bring total disaster. And what did Scoresby do this time? He just mistook his left hand for his right hand. That was all. An order came for him to fall back and support our right. Instead, he moved forward and went over the hill to the left. We were over the hill before this insane movement could be discovered and stopped. And what did we find? A large and unsuspected Russian army waiting. And what happened? Were we all killed? That is exactly what would have happened in 99 cases out of 100. But no, those surprised Russians thought that no one regiment by itself would come around there at such a time. It must be the whole British army, they thought. They turned tail. Away they went over the hill and down into the field in wild disorder, and we after them. In no time there was the greatest turnaround you ever saw. The Allies turned defeat into a sweeping and shining victory. The Allied commander looked on, his head spinning with wonder, surprise, and joy. He sent right off for Scoresby and put his arms around him and hugged him on the field in front of all the armies. Scoresby became famous that day as a great military leader, honored throughout the world. That honor will never disappear while history books last. He is just as nice and pleasant as ever, but he still does not know enough to come in out of the rain. He is the stupidest man in the universe. Until now, nobody knew it but Scoresby and myself. He has been followed day by day, year by year, by a strange luck. He has been a shining soldier in all our wars for years. He has filled his whole military life with mistakes. Every one of them brought him another honorary title. Look at his chest, flooded with British and foreign medals. Well, sir, every one of them is the record of some great stupidity or other. They are proof that the best thing that can happen to a man is to be born lucky. I say again, as I did at the dinner, Scoresby's a complete fool.
This is the VOA Special English Development Report. Counterfeit medicines are a widespread problem in developing countries. Like other counterfeits, they look like real products. But counterfeit drugs may contain too much, too little, or none of the active ingredients of the real thing. People do not get the medicine they need. And in some cases, the counterfeits cause tragic problems of their own. About a year ago, more than 80 children in Nigeria died after being given medicine for teething pain. And more than 20 children in Bangladesh died last year after being given acetaminophen. In both cases, the medications contained ingredients that looked, smelled, and tasted like the real thing. But the medicine in Bangladesh was produced by a local drug manufacturer that used a dangerous substitute to save money. And in the case in Nigeria, an illegal chemical dealer sold counterfeit glycerin to a drug company. That company then used the chemical to make the teething medicine. The World Health Organization says the problem with counterfeit medicines is especially bad in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The WHO estimates that up to 30% of the medicines on sale in many of those countries are counterfeit. Counterfeit medications are also a problem in the Middle East and in many countries of the former Soviet Union. The problem is less widespread among industrialized countries. The WHO says counterfeits represent less than 1% of the illegal drug market in countries like the United States, Canada, Japan, and New Zealand. But the agency also says as much as 50% of the medicine sold on the internet is counterfeit. Most people have no way to tell if medications are what they seem. The Center for Medicine in the Public Interest is a group in New York supported in part by the drug industry. It predicts counterfeit sales will reach $75 billion worldwide this year, nearly double the level of 2005. Substandard medicines are also a widespread problem in the developing world. How are they different from counterfeits? The legal difference is that counterfeit drugs are made with the purpose of misleading people. Substandard drugs are just poorly made. And that's the VOA Special English Development Report. Next week, learn what is being done to fight counterfeit medicines. Transcripts, podcasts, and captioned videos of our reports can be found at voaspecialenglish.com.